This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I am your co-host, Jonathan, and I'm with my friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And we have a guest today, which I'm excited about. His name is Saja Fendél, and he's the founder of the Thought Dojo, which is a contemplation studio focused on helping others realize unconditional happiness and supreme inner contentedness in their daily lives. His meditations are guided experiences that help us recognize and reveal the nature of our mind, pure consciousness, and happiness itself. And I know from watching some of your videos, Saja, that you're very much into non-duality and practical methods to help people. So welcome to Awareness Explorers.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
One of the things I noticed, Brian knows your stuff a little bit better than I, but I was looking at some of your YouTube videos, which I enjoyed, and I thought you had great titles for all of them. So I just want to mention some of these titles because there might be people out there that want to watch them. Remove all thinking without effort, how I solved anxiety, surrender to the infinite, non-duality should integrate with our humanity. And once I knew this about awareness, awakening was effortless. Great titles. I might steal a couple of them someday, but
go for it. They're probably all stolen on myself anyway.
Yeah. So how long have you been into non-duality and putting this all together?
I had a severe depression when I was 17, and then pretty much went 0 to 100 when I was 19. I had a awakening through psychedelics with the influence of Steve Jobs. I had sat there in my car and just said, this is either there is some wise old man somewhere on the planet who just knows how to stop suffering or just has some type of alternative answer to the projection I had, which was suffering for the rest of my life. And I said, either I'll find a way out or I'll kill myself. So then the first thing that came to my head was Steve Jobs. He was the only kind of guy in my life who I knew about. I didn't know much else about anything else. And he said the two things that changed his life was reading the book Be Here Now and taking LSD. So I did those two things, and then I've shared a video on it, but it's without going into too much detail and taking up too much time. Had a very peculiar experience. It wasn't a typical awakening experience. It was actually included a lot of suffering and guilt that I had to overcome. It was this weird, it felt like I was going through some type of policing process. That's another way to describe it. Something was testing me to some degree. It felt demonic in some ways, but also angelic. I can't explain the attitude of this kind of thing, and all of a sudden it just took me through this path of infinite limbo, infinite suffering, infinite guilt, and then I had to overcome this infinite guilt of causing all the suffering I had just felt. So it's like I felt the infinite suffering. Then I believed I fully comprehended I had caused all of that suffering. And then I had to forgive all of it. I had to feel all the suffering that's ever existed. And then I had to forgive, be it myself, for having caused all of the suffering to ever have existed. And then in the forgiving, I realized, firstly, I prayed to God. God could not forgive me because I couldn't find God. There was no God, no God was appearing. It felt like crickets. I was praying in absolute agony for God to forgive me. There was just tumbleweed. And then I realized the only person I could forgive was myself. And then I realized, well, the only thing I can forgive that could forgive that would be God. And then just like that, there was just this recognition that I am God and everything is God and there is only God. There was never any suffering that took place, and that everything is already given the freedom to exist. And then beyond that point was just firstly trauma, having gone through that, but then the more the trauma healed of going through the suffering aspect of that experience, it was like my individual self had to cleanse that. And this happened when I was 18, 19 years old. I'm now 26. And then beyond that point was just undoubted, devoted attention to this path.
That's quite a story. And psychedelics, certainly helped in my awakening as well.
Mhm.
And it sounds almost similar to some of the people like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie, where they have this big shift. I'm wondering, after that experience, was your life immediately different, or did it take a while to grow into some of these changes in perception?
Oh, it would continuously deepen, and it still does.
Hmm.
I believe that the teaching teaches itself continuously in our experience, and I think it continuously develops. So what I experienced was uh, there was this my mind at the time couldn't fully comprehend what had happened. It was still coming out of that experience. I couldn't comprehend fully what had gone on, and there was so much. I mean, this was from my point of view, I had just relived every single possible variation of this lifetime. So,
Hmm.
my point of view, I just spent an infinite amount of years reliving every possibility. So that was also a huge thing to process coming out of this. Then there was also the other stuff. So the thing I was left with was absolute certainty that either I'm God, the God, and everybody else is like in a dream character, or
Hmm.
that everything is God. And I knew which one I wanted it to be. I knew which one I hoped it would be. Um, and it turned out it was that one, and that is that everything is God, everything is absolutely God, and that took about a couple of weeks to figure out when just listening to an Alan Watts video, or seeing an Alan Watts quote, and then that was then just deepening from then.
One word that you used in that description earlier is one of my favorite words in this whole non-duality game, and that's already. Uh, as if forgiveness had already happened, was already here. And it applies in so many ways. We think we need to allow and accept everything, but when we sort of identify with our true nature as awareness itself, we see that it's already allowing, accepting, allowing. Happiness is already here, not something you get from outside. You just need to uncover the uncover it from the veils of future thinking, etc.
Yes,
So many ways already defines it. What is that your experience as well?
yes. It's if it, the way that we think of forgiveness or acceptance, reality is we call it forgiveness on the relative level because it's got a quality like forgiveness, but reality is a perpetual state of empty givingness. So it's empty so it can be filled, and it's filled with emptiness. So it's a constant forgiveness. Forgiveness is that pure, absolute, pre-giving all things the freedom to exist. That's exactly what reality is. So uh we when we think of it, we think of it as like first there was creation, then creation created. That's the constant state of reality. So forgiveness is the absolute state of reality. It didn't, you know what I mean? Like the reason I say it like this is because we often think of it in terms of like the Big Bang, where like something was nothing, then something happened. but that state of perpetual forgiveness is what's taking place. So it's almost like, the best way you can put it is almost like it's pre-forgiven. Obviously, that's a poetic way of saying it, but it's so forgiving. It's as if it's already given permission for all things to take place exactly as they are.
Yeah, that's exactly what
Yeah,
I was trying to get at with the question.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go dive deeper into this forgiveness because it's not a subject that we've talked a lot about on the podcast. And I've noticed that, like in Christianity, there's a big focus on that. You know, Jesus died on the cross to forgive our sins. And I've never really related so much to that,
Mhm.
uh, you know, because forgiving myself has never been a big part of my path. And yet it seemed like for you, being able to forgive yourself was like an obstacle in the path that this experience helped you to just dislodge. Is that an accurate way of saying it?
I would suggest all you've been doing is forgiving yourself on this path. It's the ultimate state is that forgiveness. We call it acceptance, surrender. But what
Mm-hmm.
we're doing is we are giving all experience the freedom to exist. So you might not
Mm-hmm.
have forgiven in the ordinary sense, the relative forgiveness where I've done something and I need to forgive myself to release it. That's a form, an aspect of forgiveness, but all the traditions are pointing to that same perpetual, we could call it like a perpetual state of giving all things the freedom to exist completely as they are.
So it's a completely allowing things without resistance of any kind.
Yes, but that's not to be misinterpreted without guiding
Uh-huh.
that which is why a lot of people say, oh, but if this is the kind of paradox people find themselves in is if I am an undoubting, all forgiving yes to everything, then should I let murders happen and should I let people abuse me and is this all
Yeah.
okay? And that's but before we go there, we have to first really recognize this forgiveness, this absolute nature of reality, because without prior context to that, it's we don't have access yet to wisdom. So we have to go to that aspect, which is what we could call love. Love is essentially the all-embracive yes to everything. And then that then has to be guided with wisdom. So then wisdom on the relative level looks like learning how to navigate this all-embracive yes to everything while still applying justice and
Mm-hmm.
appropriate responses to things on the relative level, which seem contradictory to this absolute nature of all forgiving yes to everything.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
sometimes think of it this way. We allow all things to be as they are, but some of the things we need to allow are the fact that sometimes we're called upon to take certain action. Like
yes,
if a child is drowning, we might be called upon to jump in and save the child, and something we need to allow and accept just as well. So I don't think that allowing everything to be as it is precludes taking action. Action that we're called upon to take is another thing to be allowed.
yes, exactly. Yes, people think the Buddha just sat there and did nothing. The Buddha was very attached to his experience. He was very identified with his body. If the Buddha wasn't identified with his mind, then what would he do? What would he do? What would he do at all? There, there's very a lot of misconceptions that I see is that people think, oh, I need to stop identifying with my thoughts. I need to stop identifying with my body and my mind, and I can't be attached. On the contrary, if we weren't identified with the body and the mind, I wouldn't be getting into my car, putting on my clothes, right? We need to develop this intelligence that says that I know the me on the level of the body and the mind is the me on the level of the body and the mind. You know what I mean? You might have seen that yourselves with the kind of in the kind of paradigm of non-duality.
Mm-hmm. Do you, as part of your teachings, suggest specific things that people can do to either forgive themselves or to let go of anxiety? I know that you said anxiety and depression was a problem for you. Do you do practices for yourself now, or do you suggest those?
The one thing I suggest is an all-embracive forgiving to our entire experience. People try to fixate on an emotion in order to feel it, process it, let it go. But the only reason we would ever focus individually on an emotion or a feeling is if we're trying to get rid of it. And if we're trying to get rid of it, as you both know, it just causes more resistance. So the most effective approach that I've found is to give complete freedom to everything and to be always that freedom. Be always that forgivingness that gives all things the freedom to exist. The sounds that appear right now in your experience, they are being experienced and let go instantaneously. There's no resistance to them. The sensations that we call anxiety or emotions, they're exactly the same. The sensation of your bum on the chair is no different to the sensation of anxiety. The only difference is that anxiety is a sensation in combination with a belief that we should not be experiencing it. You see?
Mm-hmm.
If we thought the sensation of our bum on the chair was a problem, we would suffer that. We would suffer that like we would anxiety. So, so the role is just like we are always in a perpetual state of letting experience be. Continue letting experience be with the feelings that happen in our chest or our stomach or wherever they are.
It reminds me what you've been saying just now reminds me of one of your videos where you had a metaphor, which I thought was really wonderful. It was the metaphor of the spider web for emotions that's made up of sensation and belief. I was wondering if you could go into that metaphor a little bit, because I think it's germane to what we're just talking about.
Okay, so like I mentioned about the difference between the sensation of our bum on the chair and anxiety is that one sensation is in combination with a thought that believes it shouldn't be there or that we shouldn't experience it. Um, all sensation that we find uncomfortable. So basically, the analogy is that an emotion is the combination of two things: a feeling or a sensation, just like any other sensation, and a thought. And when we have a thought about it, usually that's fine. If we have two thoughts about it, it gets a little more sticky. Three thoughts, a little stickier. And then all of a sudden we have a web of thoughts that are attached to the sensation. And we only seem to, the more thoughts we add, emotions that we don't have a problem with, we don't add many thoughts to. Happiness, we don't add any thoughts to that. We don't add any thoughts to joy. There's just pure causeless happiness. We don't give reasons to it. These more sticky emotions, they usually come from a time when we've resisted our experience and learnt that resisting this emotion will be effective again. So we attach, I shouldn't feel this because of that. This I don't deserve to feel. And these are like webs. So these beliefs are like a spider's web that trap the sensation. So in order for us to fully be with these emotions without suffering them, we have to essentially disentangle it from the web of beliefs that bind it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
well, I like that, and I sometimes will try to come up with phrases to help point me in this direction, uh, because I forget it. So the phrase I'm using now when I have what could be called uncomfortable feelings is "it's all good." I'm sitting here with anxiety. That's all good,
Yeah.
and that helps me to not resist and to surrender to the moment of what is.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have tricks like that, or if it just is more automatic for you.
For me, it's completely automatic, but I would
Mhm.
suggest if there is a thought, if the emotion continues to cause suffering, we have to we have to see the truth in the belief that is binding it, because the reason it's causing suffering is because we don't want it to be there. We, the source of existence, do not want something to exist. How magical is that? And
Mm.
because we're so compassionate and loving, we will still allow it to be there, but we will just suffer through it. So all we do is seek the truth of the thought that is binding that emotion. And the questions can be creative. We can create our own. It really does depend on what the feeling, what the emotion is saying, or what we're saying to the emotion. So, for example, anxiety. We can ask questions like, um, what is the, and I suggest going all the way, because why would we go halfway? If the anxiety is related to death, which it always usually is, some form of identity, then we need to inquire into the one that is feeling the anxiety, and we need to see its reality. That's what I would do. You can do, there's more, there's less progressive paths, which is what therapy is for. Therapy, your therapist won't say, on whose behalf is this anxiety being felt, because most people at that stage have a lot stickier emotions. There's a lot more to go through. I'm talking specifically now to us guys, and to probably the majority of the listeners. Um, we need to see on whose behalf is that anxiety being felt. If the anxiety is being felt on behalf of what, where is that entity that it's being felt by? We'll always find that there is no specific embodied entity that is having anxiety. And that then will be seen as, well, then if no one is having the anxiety, then why do I feel like I am having anxiety? What is the I that feels like I'm having the anxiety? And then we see that, oh, I have temporarily lost myself in the emotion or the thought or the belief, then subsequently the feeling. So we just drop it. It's so simple. It's so gentle. We just drop it. And that doesn't mean that the feeling will instantly disappear, but it means the feeling is no longer a problem. So then we go then into this all-embracive forgivingness to our entire experience, which is like we are already accepting all sensations, sights, sounds, smells, touches, tastes. We then continue accepting the emotion. We don't need to focus on it. The only time I would suggest, in my experience, that it's been necessary to focus on an emotion is if we're trying to befriend it. So there's the difference between it's like if we're being genuinely friendly with it, right? Like the flatmate who's been in our apartment for 10 years and we've never introduced ourselves. We're introducing ourselves as a friend. We're not introducing ourselves because the lease is up in a month and we need to kick him out, right? We're not doing it. We're not doing that. We're introducing ourselves genuinely as a friend to get to know it. If I thought it was so uncomfortable to live with it for so long, why don't I try the one thing I've never tried? See what's so uncomfortable about it.
Mhm.
And then we find there's never any discomfort. We'd be very good friends, in fact, if we got to know each other. That's the kind
Yeah.
of attitude to have, I think.
Yeah, I think that's so great. Because a lot of the emotions we see as an enemy, particularly, let's say, fear. Let's say you have a fear of doing what you need to do in order to succeed in your career or
Yeah.
whatever that fear might be. And you
Yes.
see that as an obstacle and as an enemy. But
Yes.
when I first realized that it wasn't an enemy, it was installed at a very early age and it was there to protect me. And why would it want to protect me? Because it
Yeah.
loved me. And
Yeah.
when I saw that as, I mean, maybe its usefulness it had outgrown, but
Yeah.
when I loved it, when I said, "Oh, you love me? Wow! All right, I'll love you
I
back."
love you too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel
game
you.
changer.
Yes, exactly. And we find that if you think about it on an ultimate level, we want to protect and preserve life. That's nature. Nature wants to ultimately protect and preserve life. Yes, nature is also killing things all the time, but the human experience is where, like we've mentioned, where intelligence, love, and wisdom is imbued into that process. So therefore we can continue to be and express that love in a different way. And when you look at it like that, when you said about the emotion, it cares for you, it's a part of experience where the same love that wants to protect other people, right? The body and the minds, that if we believe that, if for example, when you believe, for example, that emotion, believe that your body and mind were integral for your survival as that which is alive. But obviously, that which is alive is not limited to the body and the mind. But at the time, it didn't know that. But however, with the resources you had, it protected what it thought it needed to protect, which is kind of what I'm seeing you say. But it's the same, it's beautiful because it's the same love that would still protect our children, our body, if we were being held at gunpoint or whatever we would do. You see what I mean? It's the same love, just slightly misguided, with limited resources, doing the best it could.
Right, right. Well, it's all love, ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you're
That's
right.
another good phrase. Instead of it's all good, it's all love.
It's all love.
Sometimes disguised, or we don't see through the disguise so easily,
Yeah.
or we interpret it in a different way. But to see that it's all love is a definite paradigm shift in how we view what's happening.
Yes, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
Mhm.
Another thing that you talk about, which attracted me to your teachings a great deal, was when you talk about happiness.
Mhm.
For example, when you talk about, you talk about unconditional happiness, and for me, I think about uncaused happiness, or happiness for no reason, happiness which is the default state, instead of something to get, something to uncover that's here. And you also had a quote that said, I'm replacing the word enlightenment with happiness. And that really spoke to me, because to me, that's what it's all about. Although a lot of people misunderstand that and think that if I want happiness, that means I want my experience to be a certain way. And that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm very interested in the pedagogical side of things with this approach. It's always been my interest because um I actually don't know why, but it's been my interest, and I've been observing the way that we use language and metaphors, and I think that Rupert, um, who we all know here,
Rupert Spira.
Rupert Spira is he was, I didn't realize at the time, but he was my teacher, and I've observed how he works and what he does and how he shares things, and it's no doubt that I've resonated with him so deeply. But what we find is that the word enlightenment, uh, I mean, have you guys ever seen a Bollywood movie?
Yeah, once.
Yeah. They're way over the top, and the enlightenment is like the Bollywood movie version of the word happiness. We have the word happiness, it's more British. And then we have a Bollywood movie equivalent, which is the word enlightenment. And the problem is that when we use the word, it implies a state of mind, it implies a different experience, it implies a goal, it implies something to attain. This is why the Buddhist tradition, they call it attainment, spiritual attainment. I've attained something. And I mean, the word must have been created by someone who didn't know what it was, because I doubt the Buddha would make up the word. You see, so it's we've got to be, language has to evolve to the need of the time. All teachings have to evolve to the need of the time. We don't want to completely disregard them. In fact, there's many teachings that are absolutely golden, that have just stood the test of time. But there's a lot of things that are misunderstood. And a lot of the problem is that we find written text. It's all written text, right? Written text. And how we all know the profundity of listening to someone who genuinely understands what they're talking about. It's very different to reading a piece of text. You know, ChatGPT could create could repeat the words of someone, but somehow the someone who understands is going to have a different effect. So this is the kind of thing I believe that the teachings have to be brought to a modern audience, but not to have lost their essence or their quality. And that's a thing that I'm learning every day. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes responsibility as well. And I find that a lot of teachers and teachings, they don't want that responsibility. They want to have, oh, I stumbled on the path God chose, just the universe aligned, and it just, you know what I mean? It just avoids accountability. It's like if you imagine a relationship, right? The highest relationship is where we choose each other. We don't just the lowest quality relationship is, well, we just lived with we just met and never committed to one another. We're just still here. That's a low committing relationship. There's no commitment to the relationship. And I believe that this is the time for a very conscious, intentional degree of relationship to sharing the truth, experiencing it, and being a teacher. And I understand we don't just want to self-impose ourselves to be a teacher. However, if we're going to teach, if we don't want to call ourselves a teacher, then don't be a teacher. Do you see what I mean? We have to take responsibility for what we're sharing and how we're sharing it. I believe that is something that has been ignored for I don't know how long.
You know, along those lines, Saja, you have a video called Non-Duality Should Integrate with Our Humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could speak about that and what that looks like.
So if we think of the yin and yang symbol, we've got the black and then we've got the white, and then in the black we've got the white, and in the white we've got the black. Non-duality is a phase in the same likeness to a boy becoming a man. The boy is always implicit in the man, and the man is always implicit in the boy. However, the point that the boy becomes a man is still a phase. Likewise, non-duality is a phase of maturity. It's not when we think of non-duality, we think of a spectrum of teachings. The spectrum of teachings are always implicit on the spiritual path, but the spectrum of teachings we identify with as non-duality is a phase. They're not the be-all end-all teachings to live by. And the reason for that is because most of the path that we see, if we type non-duality on YouTube, every video that we find, 99% of them will be taking people to the white side of the yin and yang symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find in our modern day is that most people have already recognized the white half of the yin and yang, which is the awakening, the recognition of our absolute infinite nature. The problem is then that they go back to the black side because they're still there. They're still having a universal experience. I've spoken to people who say, oh, I had we could just label it right for the explanation. Full white side recognition. I am the absolute. I knew my true nature. I was infinite, and there was never any suffering. And I found it funny that I was a mother, and I didn't feel like I had a relationship. Like it was funny that I had these types of relationships. Obviously, that's not the place to live by. You see, because and then if we take that all the way and stay there, we completely disregard the fact that every awakening experience is implicit with a world. It's implicit with a form, and it's implicit with a body and a mind. Do you know anyone who's had an awakening experience who didn't carry on walking down the street?
They're not with us now, so no.
So 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 this is the point. The point is that we have non-dual teachings that are teaching that the white side of the yin and yang is the final place to be. This means that there is no self, non-existence, nothing happens, but there is only happenings. There is no then responsibility on an individual level for anything. There's also no responsibility then for developing the teaching. There's also no responsibility then for doing pretty much anything. And you see that. You see that this is what these teachers are saying. And what happens then is that we end up, just like the black side, which was ignorance, we end up in a spiritual ignorance. We end up to one polarity, we end up in the full extreme of the other. So we need to be the entire spectrum. And that includes individuality, it includes personal responsibility, it includes personal decisions, because that which is the source of reality, everything, is universal, making personal decisions in the individual experience. So we don't just want to surrender to the universe. Oh, I'll just sleep with my neighbor. Sorry, love. The universe guided me to do it. There was nobody here. No one exists. I hope you understand. This is not the
That
way.
didn't work when I told my wife about that. So I know that doesn't work.
Exactly. So we if we take it all the way, that's what we're saying. So
Yeah.
contrary to that, we need to go, and the black side of the yin and yang in this example, it doesn't imply duality. It doesn't imply separation or suffering. It's when we believe that just if we believe we are just that black side of the yin and yang, which is representative of the individual experience, and that we believe we are fundamentally the individual, then there's obviously an imbalance. That's what causes suffering. Then on the flip side of that, if we believe we're supposed to just be the absolute and disregard the individual and the world, then we find another subtle form of suffering that is even harder to let go of, because we think we know. We think we know the truth. Because the paradox is, if we think we know, no, we're screwed. But the problem is, it's so subtle that we'll tell ourselves that we know nothing, yet subtly thinking we know. So then we'll avoid all responsibility. It's a crazy thing to see.
Seems like people get stuck on both sides of that spectrum. It's all non-dual, and then total identification with the individual self. And it's hard to bring those two worlds together, especially, while doing email, driving your car, and having relationships. It's a very subtle balance. And I think that's our next step collectively as humans, to figure out what that looks like and what helps people to do that.
Yeah, you talked about that in the video where you were talking to Rupert, and Rupert said your humanity has to be your priority, not your non-duality. And Rupert often talks about the inward-facing path and the outward-facing path, which is very similar to, I think, your yin and yang analogy. And I think there's a famous quote from Nisargadatta that speaks to this, which I'm probably going to misquote, but it's something like, when I look inside, I see myself as nothing, and when I look outside, I see myself as everything, and between those two, my life swings. And it seems to me that if we are one under the surface, in other words, if what's looking out through my eyes is the same as what's looking out through your eyes, how could I not have compassion in my actions toward you?
Yes. Exactly. That's the paradox that we have to solve, because non-duality will tell us that there's no world. It'll be disregarded as illusory. And when we think of something that's illusory, what also is implied with that is that it has less reality. And therefore it indirectly diminishes the story, the individual, and relationships. And it also bypasses subtly a responsibility to grow and learn. because we think, well, no, I shouldn't grow and learn. I've recognized my true nature. There's no more learning to be done. I am infinite. That's a completely ignorant thing to say,
Mhm.
with all due respect, right? But we have to wake up to that as well. So, yeah, that's what I mean by integrating it into our humanity, is to see that the the ultimate place to be is a really, really nice human being.
Yeah.
And not to be consciousness. If someone asks me who am I don't just answer with consciousness, because it's not just what I am. Yes, ultimately it's what I am, but it depends when you ask me. If I'm driving, I'm driving. If I'm happy, I'm happy. If I'm excited, I'm excited. But inherent and implicit in all those experiences is my true nature. That's the power. That's how we, those the experiences don't take me away from reality. That's what's implied with the non-dual teachings that is misunderstood.
Mhm.
Yeah, you talk about being fully juiced as a human in that video I spoke of, and I really loved that because, I
Yeah,
mean, you're the individual personality is still there, and
yeah,
it actually can be free to express its utter individuality
yes,
and wonderfulness and interestingness with all its strengths and flaws
yes,
allowed to be, that life blooms and blossoms, and the infinite consciousness and the individual experience can be, we can have both. I think I'm paraphrasing you in that video there.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree.
And speaking of that video, which is I think the one where you talked to Rupert, I was wondering if we could backtrack a little to where you were talking about your history, and could you talk a little bit about Rupert Spira and your and what you learned from him and how you interacted with him?
Um, from Rupert gave me the language to interpret my experience. And with that language, I quickly developed the ability to to see how Rupert was seeing the world. It was just Rupert reflected to me my own inner nature. And I asked him one day, how do you do these meditations? I also asked Francis one day, how do you, because I thought that maybe Rupert had kind of learned it from Francis. And I asked Francis, the first thing he said was, do you know Rupert? In my terrible French accent. I was like, yes. He goes, go to Rupert. So anyway, I went back to Rupert, and I interacted with him mostly online. I've met Rupert once live, but mostly online webinars, weekly webinars, retreats, things like that. And I asked him about what he does in these meditations. And he said, I don't script them. I don't. They're all freestyles. They're all just, I'm just describing experience. And then when he said that, it just made complete sense. And then he encouraged me to start looking at on my own. Obviously, I already was, but it dawned upon me one day that I was running the tap and I was washing a mug, and then a thought came in that said, "Listen to the sound of the tap." And I listened to the sound of the tap, and then another thought said, "Listen to the sound of the silence around the sound of the tap." And I could hear the silence as equally as objective as I could hear the tap. The tap was meant to be loud, obviously, because it's a sound, but the silence was equally as prominent. And then another thought came in that said, now listen to the silence amongst the noise of experience. And then instantaneously, obviously that was a metaphorical way of saying it, and instantaneously I was just taken there. And that was the first time I knew that you could use thinking to take you directly to your being. And then I didn't stop. Every single day, these contemplations were going through my mind, and I realized that all these contemplations, the real contemplation starts with silence. The real contemplation starts, and then that was what I learned from Rupert.
It's a great story. It's a great story. You now have me excited to hear a meditation that you do to help our listeners. And I love your description of that you're describing direct experience, and people are kind of like riding the waves of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we, a lot of times we get caught up in thinking of meditation as other things, like you're, saying a mantra, you're focusing on your breath or whatever. But sounds like with your experience of Rupert's meditations and what you came to do, that it's a slightly different way of guiding people into meditative experiences.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear one of those.
Okay, let's do it. So bring yourself to yourself. What we find, and what is usually intended by these explorations, is that we are exploring these like we would explore a science project or a piece of art. We are just exploring it. Someone said before, it's like I'm outsourcing my thinking to you. I'm outsourcing my philosophizing. And I thought that was a funny way of putting it. So what we're doing is just completely surrendering your doing to surrender it to life in this moment. Outsource your entire doing to life. If you need to scratch your head, life will hire one of your arms to scratch it for you. Nothing here needs to be done. Life will do it all. You need to breathe. Your life will outsource it to your lungs. You need to cough. Life will outsource it to your throat. In day-to-day experience, what we typically find is a duality between what we are and what experience is. And because of this duality, this seeming separation, we could be perfectly comfortable in the oneness of our own eyes closed sitting position, but then find that the peace we find in the comfort of our meditation is lost. The quality is lost when we experience the world. And the reason for that is because we have created a model of reality that implies separation. So when we perceive a world, when we look at an object, when we have a conversation, there is duality. That's legitimate. What is illegitimate is to believe that duality implies separation. So because of our conditioning that tells us duality implies illusion or duality implies separation, we will then act and behave in accordance to that separation. This is why the peace seems to be lost and we leave the comfort of our cushion, so to speak. So what I want everybody to see right now is that there is an existingness that we, I want to say have, but it's also what we are. we undoubtedly exist in this moment. And what we find is that the world undoubtedly exists in this moment. The problem is when we find a distance or a separation between my existence and the existence of the world. What we need to see is that the world that exists doesn't exist independently on its own from that which is experiencing it. And what we find, if we were to go and touch the world that we experience, we'll use a sensation. We find that the minute we touch something, we find just a sensation. And if we were to describe the quality of a sensation, if we were to take a piece of that, we would find only a quality that is inherent in our mind. For example, the object you touch doesn't have a sensation. There's no sensation in an object. Sensation is a quality inherent in our mind. And what we do is we say the object has a sensation and I sense the sensation. So what we're doing here is recognizing objects don't have a sensation. So when we touch an object, and you can do that right now, I want to try and make this interactive. You can keep your eyes closed because the visual field is often the most dense and tricky field to go with. When we feel something, we think we're feeling an object, but all we actually experience is a sensation. And this is very important to distinguish because that implies that there is actually no object there outside of our experience. So what we're feeling when we touch an object is a internal, it's ultimately not internal, but this is a concession, an internal experience. Now, what I want you to do is to take a thought. Let's take the thought, the wave is waving in the ocean. And ask yourself the question, does that thought take place inside or outside you? Is it an outside experience, like if you've seen a bird? Or is it an inside experience? What you'll find is that it's an inside experience. The experience takes place inside us. The thought doesn't take place outside whatever it is that we are. Now, I want you to, parallel to the experience of the thought, take the sensation that you are feeling of whatever it is that you're feeling, it doesn't matter what it is, and ask yourself, is that an internal or an external experience? If you remove the visual idea of the object and just experience the sensation, is that taking place in a different place to the experience of your thought? Is it taking place outside in the world, or is it taking place here in this space of awareness? What we find is that if it's a sensation can only take place inside us. There's no sensation outside. It's an internal experience. And then what we find is that that applies to every sensation we experience, everything we touch in the world, everything we hear in the world. Every time we hear a sound, sound is not in the object. No object has a sound. If I was to take a cue ball, dissect it, I would never find sound inside it. Sound is an experience purely within our mind. And that experience is a pure perception. That perception is pure awareness. Ask yourselves, could you take awareness away from the experience of a perception? A perception is a the field of hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, or smelling. Well, if awareness wasn't inherent in those experiences, we wouldn't be touching, tasting, hearing, or smelling. So we cannot take awareness away from it. So what we find when we go far enough is that all experience takes place in the same place. We don't need to know where that place is. It doesn't matter. We just need to know and see clearly that all experience takes place. We could call it here. And when we say here, we mean it in the same likeness to the way we use the word now. When we say the word now, we don't mean now at 6 o'clock. We mean the now that is ever present. Well, likewise, the here is the infinite aspect of no awareness. Not no awareness, but no where-ness. Just in the same way that the now is eternal timelessness, placelessness, here is eternal nowhereness. And that's where this experience takes place. So what we find is every single sense faculty that seems to experience a separate world is always only ever experiencing the inherent world of our being. And in that recognition, we find complete intimacy with our experience. Complete, we call it oneness, but or non-duality, no separation between what I am and what I experience, because what I experience is never separate from what I am. Doesn't take place outside me. And if there is no outside, there is no inside. So then if we were to take all of these experiences, sight, smell, touches, taste, what we find is there's just pure hearing, pure sensation. We never sense an object, we just experience sensation. We never hear an object, we just experience hearing. And implicit in those experiences is pure awareness. You cannot take away awareness from perception. Perception and awareness are one. Mind and awareness are one. There is no separation between awareness, experiences separately to itself a perception. The perception and awareness are a coherent, simultaneous experience. Because ultimately, the only thing we experience in the perception is awareness. So everything we touch is just made of being, made of awareness. It's just raw. If you just touch your table or leg, whatever it may be, and we're using table leg as an example to point to it, but the thing we touch is always awareness. So this is a simple way of, maybe not so simple in some regards, but this is a simple way of recognizing the intimacy of our experience and realizing that on an experiential level, there is no separation between what we are and what the world is. The world is what we are, and what we are is the world. Thank you.
That was very profound and unique. I really like that. Parts of me were at moments like almost like resisting it because it was so shifting of the paradigm that I often live in. And I found that when I surrendered to what you were talking about, it opened up like this huge, oh yeah, like that. So it was quite a wild ride. How was it for you, Brian?
Yeah, I loved it. I experienced it sort of directly without analysis.
Mhm.
And it went straight through me. And by the end, it sounded like you, the world, were talking to me, the world.
It was like a curveball that eventually led to this very deep aha experience. So thank you for that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the feedback, both of you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. How can people find out about your work?
YouTube,
Uh-huh.
Saja Fendél on YouTube, and I have a free community, the Thought Dojo. And that would be the place to hear the meditations and to interact and to be in a place of like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put
Yeah.
links to those in the show notes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Brian.
And do you do this full time or do you have other work as well?
I do it full time.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, I work with people one-to-one
Uh-huh.
at the free community, and I have a paid community which has just been rolling out to invite people in the free community, and I do it full time.
You know, Saja, I noticed that a lot of people are now kind of being one-to-one spiritual coaches, and that's almost like a new thing that is showing up a lot. And it's good to hear that you're doing that as well. And I think that's a much better than say the guru approach, which we used to have,
Mhm.
where people can get this one-to-one coaching in a way that really serves their individual self and where they are at.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's more so now to the age of the friend, the age
Mhm.
of the friend. And I think that, yeah, I fully agree.
Good.
Mm.
Any last words, Brian?
I resonate with that, the age of the friend.
Mm.
I really like that. And to all our friends who are
Mhm.
listening, I can't wait. Well, I can't wait for all our friends to hear this. And I'm very grateful to you, Saja, for coming on and sharing this so generously.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys for having me. It's been an amazing conversation. I've loved every second of it. So thank you for having me on.
Mhm.
Great.
And thank you to our listeners and keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
And we just want to tell you again that we thank our Patreon supporters. And we're often giving these extra pieces to our Patreon supporters of people we interview. Sometimes they go on for a while and they're very interesting because they're less formal and they tend to be even more fun than usual and can be very thought provoking. So that's something that we send to all our Patreon supporters as well as other extra stuff. So if you want to support us at any amount, go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. And we really appreciate your help that way.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.